Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Plant Services Tool Belts Podcast. I'm Tom Welth, Chief Editor of Plant Services, and today's discussion focuses on Gen Z, the generation of young adults who are just starting to make an impact in the industrial workplace. A research study conducted in June by Parsable of 1,000 U.S. respondents aged 18 to 24 found that the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on Gen Z's perception of manufacturing. For example, more than half of the respondents said they had not considered frontline manufacturing as a potential career before the pandemic, and of those 54%, about a quarter are now open to exploring it. Today I talk with Lawrence Whittle, who is the CEO of Parsable. He's been extensively involved in the manufacturing technology space for his 25 years career, and he spoke with me about findings from the Parsable study and his own thoughts on generational attitudes towards industry.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Can you tell us about yourself, Lawrence, and your work since joining Parsable?
Absolutely. So great to be on the podcast. So my name is Lawrence Whittle. I'm the CEO of Parsable. As you can probably hear, originally from the UK. I left London 30 years ago and have been based in California for the last 15 years. And throughout my sort of 25 years career, I've been extensively involved in the manufacturing technology space. So I started my career working with manufacturing companies, especially in the process industry, and I joined Parsable just over 4 years ago as we started to get sort of our ideas put together around transforming the lives of frontline workers. So we've been driving that mission since 2016 in terms of when our product first went to market, and built a really interesting business in terms of providing modern digital tools to frontline workers.
Great. And we're speaking today because of a research study that you and your team did, specifically focusing on perceptions by Gen Z of manufacturing. The survey was released about 2 weeks ago, I believe, or less than a week ago.
Last week. And some of the data points are really fascinating. So I thank you for being on with the podcast to talk about what you're seeing in the survey. The first question I have for you is that for some time now, this sector of industry, maintenance and reliability, we've been trying to drive efforts to change the perception of manufacturing among both younger workers and their parents. And I know your study was focused on 18 to 24-year-olds. Your study suggests that we're starting to turn the corner on that perception, at least in having a favorable view of manufacturing, if not industrial jobs themselves. So that's a long way to introduce and say, can you tell us more about how the study came together? And your thoughts about the influence the pandemic has had on these kind of perceptions. I think this is to some extent a well understood challenge. We've been talking about the grey tsunami or the labor challenges, not just domestically here in North America, but this is actually a global issue. Before the pandemic, in addition to being the CEO of Parsable, I'm an active member of the World Economic Forum in their advanced manufacturing group. And we were already seeing that the future of work was changing, first of all, because technology becoming more and more pervasive around digital and the concepts of Industry 4.0, but also the dynamic change in the workforce. Obviously, as the pandemic hit, these workforce challenges became even more apparent because the acceleration of baby boomers retiring, lower shift patterns, lower numbers of workers has put a lot of stress on the system. So, there was a lot of concern pre-pandemic and actually for many years that we had an existential risk growing, which was, by 2030, there's expected to be 2 million jobs unfulfilled in this space, and with the baby boomers retiring. So we thought it's time to recheck in with the earlier career, the generation Zs, to see if the perception had changed. And we really wanted to understand, not just about perceptions, but also how those perceptions have changed, because we all have a perception that earlier career people do not have an interest in frontline work, industrial work. And, my father used to wear a hard hat. I've spent most of my career around the manufacturing space. I have millennials in my house and I have a Gen Z in my house. And I encourage them to think about manufacturing because people think it's noisy, dirty. Well, in fact, it's far from the truth. These are increasingly tech-enabled jobs. So, we did this survey to really get a primary pulse of a large number of people in that sort of 18 to 24s. And, it's been something that people have been thinking about a lot during the pandemic. You see what the National Association of Manufacturers have been doing.
I mentioned the World Economic Forum. We launched a community called the New Generation Industrial Leaders. And I think this pandemic really highlights the criticality of frontline workers. And therefore, let's see if the perception of frontline work has equally been changed. Because I think the world has realized that we wouldn't be eating or drinking or driving if it wasn't for frontline workers in these important manufacturing and maintenance roles.
Excellent. Well, and these perceptions, based on the survey results, seem to be changing. Were you surprised by the fact that so many of the respondents had a favorable view now of manufacturing?
So I think I was surprised, but not totally surprised, because over the last 18 months, I've seen an increasing recognition of the need to try and change these perceptions. So I was hopeful, but still a little bit surprised. And I think, some of the perceptions, for example, around salaries was an interesting one, because a lot of people have felt that the salary levels, the average salary levels for the domestic market here in the US would be even less in manufacturing. And I think the reality is that, we found that, it's higher than the national average, which is good. And I think there was a recognition from, earlier career people that actually these were not necessarily low paid entry level positions. They were becoming increasingly, competitive. And then I think the other misconception, which was actually noted, which is that, that it may be a, low skilled or manual job, but I think there's a gradual recognition which is changing around the skill sets and type of labor required, which is increasingly tech enabled. And just a real time illustration, I was talking to someone this morning, about Amazon, and people are very, very aware of, the Amazon distribution centers and e-commerce, and people's perception that, warehouses are becoming automated and there's, automated guided vehicles. Amazon have hired more people during the pandemic than they actually deployed, robots. So I think there's also this perception that jobs are going away. No, they're not going away, they're changing. And I think that was two things, the salary and the perception of the jobs, whilst they've still noted that the career was not necessarily high skilled and more manual, there was a recognition that it's changing. So that was two that I was very, very positive about.
It's interesting too. We've heard that at least in our sector, that maintenance workers might not be the ones who are always driving digital initiatives, and that the reliability teams are the ones who can most afford the time to drive new roles. But that digital technologies and advanced technologies are changing all three of those kind of roles: maintenance, operations, and reliability.
There's been technology entering parts of the industrial world over the last couple of decades. It sort of started with back-end ERP or asset maintenance systems, and they were predominantly around sort of high-level planning. What I think you've seen is that as the recognition of the need for modern technologies has emerged, people started to see that there are areas which, maintenance is a really interesting one. Efficiency is an interesting one. I think people have increasingly realized that actually there's a commonality here, which is their dark data. So a lot of the areas that are being digitized are areas where there's that 6-inch binder or that 30 years of tacit knowledge. And I think maintenance is an interesting one where, the maintenance area, these are the classic 30-year veterans that have got unbelievable tacit knowledge. They can almost maintain machines with their eyes closed, but as machines have been changing and their own workforce has been changing, I think each of these areas have adopted at different speeds, but now there's sort of it's rising, the tide is rising for everyone. People are starting to see that replacing the 6-inch binder and tacit knowledge with modern digital tools can actually touch all areas. And maintenance obviously has become incredibly interesting during the whole thing around asset performance during the pandemic, because with lower shift levels, the need to keep machines running. And so the whole importance of maintenance has gone more towards autonomous, meaning inline maintenance, where technology becomes very, very important. So I think that's one of the real positive things about the pandemic, and there's not many, which is that the recognition of certain of these roles around plant and efficiency and maintenance, and the role of humans and technologies together has really sort of been highlighted.
It's been fascinating to watch that happen too. I agree. I've seen that, especially as COVID stickouts continue across the workforce, not just maintenance. As you say, maintenance especially has had to deal with hiccups to normal processes, normal rounds to check the assets, and yeah, there's been a very strong interest that we've seen in
driving towards more automated work order development, work order management. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think the other point is that the other thing the pandemic has also highlighted is the need to actually cross-train and retrain people, because you've had people that maybe the quality person is now being asked to do some maintenance and vice versa. And so there's also this need, I think, to sort of upskill everyone to be able to almost be Swiss Army knives. And I think, where you were a maintenance engineer, now there's an opportunity for you to be more than a maintenance engineer, and vice versa. If you're a quality person, you can actually do other stuff with digital. Because this whole concept, I think, of autonomous, which is consistently and using digital to drive the whole process to be more automated. It's not about eliminating humans. It's actually just making sure these tasks are done more systematically. And I think that's really a positive sign out of the pandemic.
Well, let me ask you a question about Gen Z in particular, as opposed and how the Gen Z results from your survey might complement a survey that Plant Services had done, because we've done an annual workforce survey every other year. We're about to begin our own survey, and tomorrow actually it opens up, and we survey a cross section of job roles, from Gen Zs to millennials to Gen Xs, and also boomers, who for the first time we're seeing boomers in the minority overall of the respondent pool. When we asked them what was important that would keep them to stay in an industrial job, we found that to the whole cross section of generations, wages and benefits were as important as training and development opportunities. Now, in the Gen Z survey that Parsable did, it was a slightly different result, in that, at least to the Gen Z respondents, I think wages and benefits came out firmly on top. I'm just curious to ask you, what's your understanding of some of those key factors that would motivate workers, maybe especially Gen Z, to stay in manufacturing industry once they get there?
So I'm really looking forward to seeing your survey results, because I think the themes are aligned with. We did a survey late last year, which was more holistically around different, just frontline workers and their readiness for digital. And obviously this one was more around Gen Zs. Mm-hmm. We're at a unique time, particularly domestically here in North America, where we've got 4 generations in the workforce, starting from boomers to Gen Xers to millennials, and obviously it goes down. And I think what's occurring is that as these generations are working together, there's an increasing recognition of mutual respect. And I think about when we started our business, one of the biggest objections was, these 30-year veterans won't use modern digital tools. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, there's a perception that I'm determined to change. And actually what you find out is that most baby boomers do know how to upload a video to Facebook or send a text message to their kids in university. Obviously, the Gen Zs might do it to Instagram and use WhatsApp, but the concept of digital in the personal life is changing. So when we think about what's motivating people to stay, I think there are going to be different views against different generations. When it comes to millennials, and especially Generation Zs, the need to be fulfilled, needing to be appreciated, and to some extent to be happy. We have several customers actually monitor happiness of their frontline workers. And happiness might sound a little bit theoretical, but actually, obviously compensation is important, benefits is important, but I think people also want to be connected. And I think that's where there's a really interesting opportunity, because although the industry is suffering from this demographic shift and people retiring, you've got an opportunity to bring in a newer generation. You just need to change a little bit why they come to work, and things like reskilling, upskilling, feeling that they're part of a very ESG friendly type organization, on top of salaries and on top of benefits. So I think it's really about breaking down, perceptions of boomers versus, and sort of say, no, let's not think about perceptions. Let's actually understand what really motivates everyone. Mm-hmm. And certain things may be more important at certain stages of their career, but actually it's a rounded set of requirements that really all manufacturers that think about this strategically, I think, can really unlock both the millennials, Generation Zs, and obviously still retain as many as possible of the baby boomers.
All right. If I could ask you a question about the perceptions of four-year university grads versus vocational school grads. This data point jumped out as potentially counterintuitive. I think a lot of folks would assume that vocational grads may have a more positive perception or greater interest in manufacturing careers. But your survey found that 58% of four-year university grads were interested in manufacturing careers versus 43% of recent vocational school grads. I'm curious to know what you thought about those results and other data points which might inform why those results came around.
So this was definitely the biggest surprise for me, because I certainly assumed that the difference between vocational education and more of a 4-year university education would be maybe even flipped. If you actually look at the data, I mean, they are different, but they're not like one is 80%, one's 20%. So I think what it recognizes actually is that there's potentially, an interest within both groups as the access to manufacturing programs becomes more viable. One of the biggest things I've observed, around the world, obviously virtually, but before the pandemic physically, is how each different country and actually how each different state thinks about industrial work. There's certain countries, Germany in particular has done a fantastic job. China's done a very good job. Mexico's doing a very good job at making both vocational and university educations sort of very much harmonized around industrial world. So I think that I was surprised, but as I sat back and thought about it, my perception was, 4-year grads versus vocational would be somewhat different. But I think it's a recognition that maybe, certain people believe that, it's low skilled manual job, and maybe that's vocational, whereas university's the other way. But I think that's sort of blending. So again, it's a positive view because I think maybe the pandemic has explicitly or subliminally impacted both of those communities. And I do think it's one of the biggest opportunities we've got domestically here is to drive greater and greater curriculums in vocational training, because you do not need to have a 4-year degree to do a lot of these jobs. Okay, and that's also some of these advanced jobs, you don't need a 4-year degree. Obviously it helps, but you can do vocational education if you get the right level of syllabus. And I think that's the other sort of inherent finding, is that maybe that is starting to work into the community.
Interesting. You reminded me of something my brother-in-law once said. He's a Generation X like I am, and he went to a 2-year community college for his first 2 years, and then graduated from a 4-year university with an engineering degree. And all he ever said was, "Tom, I want to do one of two things. I want to build bridges or build toys." The issue wasn't ever staying one kind of building. He just wanted to go where he was able to build things. And so your point about the fact that this isn't a huge range of respondents here. You've got 58% versus 43%. There's an overlap. It's not like 80-20. These are folks who know they want to build something or work in that area.
That's right. And I think there's also hopefully an emerging understanding that the fear of jobs being automated away is probably more of an impact on people that are in desk jobs than actually frontline workers. There's a general understanding about automation or jobs going away, but I think people are gradually realizing actually it's a lot easier to automate a call center than it is a maintenance engineer. And I think that's something which I think almost also may be coming through, is that not only are the jobs becoming more technology enabled, but they're probably more sustainable long term as well. And I think that's another interesting thing. And you mentioned about, I'm also a Gen Xer, and I've had a passion for manufacturing for a long time. And now I can talk to my sort of kids and show them Parsable's modern digital tool and show them that this is like actually a pretty interesting role. And by the way, you could go into a bank or you could go into a manufacturing company. I think you might find more personal fulfillment and career actually in manufacturing in the future. And I think that's the other thing that may be inherently, working its way into the perceptions.
Excellent. Well, we got more questions to go, Lawrence. Let me ask you, and from a hiring perspective, let's get away from the people who responded to the survey and talk about the hiring teams. There's a lot of interest among hiring teams that I've talked to in the Gen Zs and the millennials, how to keep and retain good employees. Based on the results of your survey, what should hiring teams be doing differently, if anything, to attract the people who are responded to your survey about manufacturing?
Yeah, so I have a very, very, very strong point of view on this, which I sort of say to executives in manufacturing and in fact all frontline workers, that if you don't put this as a number one priority, you are literally running an existential risk of your business, because we've already got here a shortage of labor. It's not going to slow down. And hiring of manufacturing and maintenance teams was sort of like a it's lower down the list for the people functions. Yeah, the HR functions were more focused on the what obviously used to be called the white collar workers versus blue collar workers. I think there's a real recognition that there's three things that I think that these hiring teams need to do as a result of these surveys. Number one is really partner with educational institutions to help dispel any of these lingering misconceptions, because I think having industrial companies directly working with these education facilities, whether it's universities or vocational colleges, I think can really, really help. So get into those colleges and really start to proliferate the potential of these jobs. I think partnering with education institutions is important. I also think they need to really do a better job of explaining the range of benefits, not just it's $18 an hour and it may go up to 22, and it's got to be salary, growth opportunities, job security, diversity, availability of digital tools. A lot of these things are super important to Gen Zs, and actually I would say to increasingly everyone. And you've got to make that as part of your pitch, which is that we do believe in diversity, we do believe in security, we do believe in growth opportunities, and of course we're also going to pay a competitive salary. So I think that's the second thing, is think about the range of benefits broader than they currently think today. And then the third thing is, which is obviously to some extent why Parsable has been successful with companies, is that technology is super important to all generations. But as you go down the generation stack of baby boomers to our generation, I live my life on laptops and my smartphones. You think about millennials, you think about Gen Zs, that's the only way they've learned. Yeah. So having technology front and center and making sure that those tools are available to attract and enhance their daily lives, I think is important. So they're the three things. I think it's partnering with institutions, it's thinking about the broader spectrum of benefits of why you'd come and work, and then just making sure that technology is front and center to Gen Zs.
That's terrific. I hope anyone who's listening to this, who's on a part of a hiring team, is taking your advice to heart. Everyone who's listening, we'll put links to the blog post by Parsable, Gen Z Warms to Manufacturing Jobs, in the podcast notes section. We'll also post a link to the World Economic Forum. And with that, Lawrence Whittle, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today.
Thank you, Thomas. Really great to share these ideas with you. Thank you for having me on.